Check it out, everybody. Forest finally meets ocean. This is the EV SUV everybody's been talking about, and we rented this one from Turo, so you don't have to. I'm not interested in beating any dead horses here, but we do need to address a few things before we get stuck into the video. The first thing is obviously Fisker's precarious financial position. It's entirely possible that by the time you're watching this video, Fisker could have either declared bankruptcy or been acquired by another company. And honestly, being acquired is probably the best future for Fisker itself. Now, this is Fisker 2.0, not Fisker 1.0 that made the Karma. This is a different car company that's also run by Henrik Fisker. Now, as far as the Ocean itself goes, this is not the worst car I've ever driven, as some people have suggested, but I do think it's a car that needed a bit more time in the oven. And I'm not talking about the software as some people have assumed. Yes, the software is a little bit rough around the edges, it could use some improvement here and there, but I think that there are other aspects of the Fisker Ocean that honestly come across as half-baked, or over-engineered, overthought, because feature creep, I think, is certainly one of the reasons that the Ocean became so much more expensive than some people had hoped, and one of the reasons I think that things have started to fall apart. The third thing we should talk about is the price tag. We're going to be talking about pricing on the 2024 model in this video. If you do want to get yourselves a really cheap 2023, there are some fantastic discounts to be had, and you could actually end up with one for less than a Nissan Leaf. And obviously, if they had started the pricing ladder down there where the 2023 is now, I think everything would actually have been fine, assuming Fisker had enough cash to be a going concern. And that's probably the most important thing that you need to understand. A lot of the problems with Fisker simply have to do with the fact that they couldn't get enough investment money. And I think with the appropriate cash infusion, Fisker could have fixed everything with the Ocean. I just don't know if that's possible at this point in time. So with that out of the way, let's dive into the Ocean itself. Although not quite as sexy as Fisker's first car, the Karma, I do think the Ocean is really attractive. I love the muscular looks, the wide fender flares there, the sleek and sexy LED headlights, and the relatively subtle amount of additional lighting up front, like the little LED light bar that runs right there. Down below, we have a pretty decently sized grille for an EV, although most of it is fake. The only cooling happens right down there at the bottom, and then we find their digital radar sensor right there in the middle. There are a few technologies on the Ocean that really had a lot of promise, like the digital radar system. If you want to know more about that, you can check out some of Fisker's videos on it. But we also see some sort of unusual things up front, like a hood that does not open. There's no front trunk under there. There's nothing user serviceable. In fact, if you want to get it open, apparently you have to pry this plastic panel off here with some pry tools, and then you can unbolt the hood and then you can open it. Now, a non-opening hood is not unusual in the EV space, but I do think it is a funky decision. We see these in Mercedes and BMW EV models as well, and it does mean that some things like filling your windshield wiper fluid, they kind of end up in a weird location. For this one, it's back here just behind the hood, right in front of the windshield. Feature creep can take many forms. Things like the digital radar, it's a cool feature, but they could have used a traditional radar for adaptive cruise control. Then we have less obvious elements like the turn signals that are really nicely integrated in this midsection of the bumper with a very distinctive appeal. But we have three different light modules on each side of the vehicle. This little light bar here, the headlight module itself, and then the turn signal module down there. Clearly, it would have been less expensive to just put everything in one light module. Now, as far as the design goes, to be honest, this reminds me a lot of another vehicle manufactured in basically the same place, and that would be the Jaguar I-Pace, because this and the I-Pace are both contract manufactured in Austria by Magna. And, you know, in a weird world, I could see that Jaguar could be interested in something like the Ocean, because I think this is actually better than the Jaguar I-Pace. The I-Pace comparison is not as crazy as it might seem, because one of the issues with the Ocean has been its price tag. As equipped here, it was over $70,000, and even though this is the launch edition Ocean 1, you can get the exact same feature content essentially in a 2024 model year Ocean for about $70,500. Again, if you want a 2023, there are some fantastic discounts up to $25,000 or so off the price tag, but the future's still a little uncertain there. Now, back to this model specifically. It's 188 inches long, so it's about the size of a Ford Edge on the outside, about 7 inches longer than a Toyota RAV4, only about 2 inches shorter in terms of length than a Honda Passport, but clearly the roofline is lower to the ground. It's about 1 inch longer than a Tesla Model Y. but it has significantly less interior room than some of those other options. I think it's obvious when you really look at the details here. We get these massive fender flares because they really wanted to give it this muscular appearance, and that means that the interior had to shrink a little bit. We also get a relatively low roofline, and even though it has kind of a boxy Jaguar-esque profile back here, it actually is a little tighter on the inside than you might imagine. Ground clearance is also a little bit lower than some. So if you're thinking of this versus something like, I don't know, the upcoming Rivian R2, which is at least 2 years away at this point in time, we have significantly less ground clearance. 6.4 to 7 inches of ground clearance depending on the model you're looking at, but that is notably more ground clearance than you'll find in a decent number of EV SUVs, like say a Ford Mustang Mach-E, that definitely has less ground clearance than this. One of the more interesting design touches has to be this turn signal repeater on the D-pillar. This is not the turn signal to meet legislative requirements. That's actually down here on the rear bumper. This is simply a repeater that shines to the back and to the side, and it really makes it obvious what an Ocean is going to do on the road, as long as the driver is, of course, using the turn signals. I think that's a really cool touch. Also really interesting, every sheet of glass on this car moves except for the windshield and this back sunroof panel. So the front sunroof opens, these windows slide down, and the glass on the back slides down. Now, I would love to show you this panel in motion, but there's a quirk you need to know about, and this is one of those longer-term maintenance concerns on the Ocean. This vehicle had its 12-volt battery replaced recently. It only has 2,500 miles on the odometer, but apparently the Ocean tends to chew through 12-volt batteries pretty rapidly due to some software bugs. And once the 12-volt battery has been replaced, there are a bunch of systems on the vehicle that have to be recalibrated and can only be recalibrated by a service person. And these windows are oddly among them. Also, the sunroof is among them. So I cannot open the sunroof, I cannot open these windows, and there are some weird errors on the dash cluster that for some reason the service guy did not address when he was at this person's house replacing the 12-volt battery before we rented it. That is one of those longer-term maintenance concerns that is truly a valid concern with anything like this. Because there are things that only a service person can do, and because 12-volt batteries will eventually wear out and you will have to replace them, you might want to pump the brakes if you're thinking about buying one of these before Fisker's future is a bit more certain. From this angle, you can see the effect of the turn signal repeaters and the main turn signals down there lower on the bumper. It definitely solves the problem of not liking low-placed turn signals and getting greater visibility. Brake lights, that's this large light bar right here at the top of that spoiler, and then this light bar right here, which certainly has a Jaguar-esque theme to it. And then we have LED fog lights, rear fog lights right there in the middle of those modules at the bottom. That's also where they put the backup lights. Big Fisker logo right there in the middle with Ocean there as well. And then if I can find the button here, we have the button to open the hatch in the back, which is a little smaller than I had thought. Also, the hatch is a little bit lower than I had thought. If you're 6 feet tall or over, you should know that you're definitely going to be bopping your head on this. The other thing you'll find back here is significantly less cargo room than in most of the competition. You'll find more than double the amount of cargo room in a Mach-E or a Model Y. Of course, they have front trunks and that adds to their total, but you'll also find more room in something like a Volvo C40, 17.3 cubic feet in that model, 16.8 back here, and that doesn't include the teeny tiny front trunk that Volvo does give you in that C40. In fact, this cargo area is small enough that it's about the same size as you'd find in a Chevy Bolt. Obviously, it's differently arranged. This is a little bit deeper and not quite as tall as the one we find in the Bolt, and it does not appear that Fisker is considering the space above this level as far as the cargo area measurement goes. So I was able to fit 4 24-inch roller bags back here, but that is significantly less than you'd get in a lot of the larger EV SUV competition. The cargo area is full of nice touches and missed opportunities. We have 40-20-40 folding rear seats, that's a nice touch. We also have a very Volvo-like load floor where you can flip it up in this position, lock it in place, and then hang your grocery bags right there on those hooks. But missed opportunities are obvious if we pull this load floor out, because they could have given us more storage room, or I don't know, something like a spare tire or something else, because they have this little foam divider back here, and that means that we don't have a load floor that goes deeper. They could have just removed these plastic dividers, just given us a big deep cargo area, and that maybe could have given this a bit more room. On the other hand, the roller cargo cover is standard. It's optional in some EVs. We have a 1600 watt inverter outlet here in the cargo area and a 12 volt power port as well. The Earth's oceans are powered by the sun and the moon, but this has a less celestial power source. It's a 113 kilowatt-hour NMC pack positioned underneath the body skateboard style. 106 kilowatt-hours of that pack is usable, so they do give us a reasonable buffer to help improve battery longevity. Power is sent to the road via a twin motor setup, 468 horsepower total, 564 horsepower in boost mode. But there is a trick with that boost mode. It's only going to work 500 times. A lot of folks are bent out of shape about that. I think it's pretty rational because boost mode is obviously going to put more stress on the driveline components, the battery, the differentials, the motors, etc. And they wanted some rational limit. So if you want something that's going to give you 564 horsepower all the time, go look at something else. This, I think, was a rational engineering decision, but a bad PR decision, because it really doesn't look good and a lot of people are fixated on it. It's not going to make an enormous difference 0 to 60 though. 4 seconds for this model without boost mode, 3.7 seconds in boost mode. Now, since this is a car we rented from Turo, I have not used boost mode because I'm kind of concerned about the owner and what is he going to do with this car if something goes wrong with Fisker. I didn't want to be the guy that used up some of his boost mode for testing, so we'll just have to believe the people that have been able to test it. Thanks to that big battery pack, range is actually pretty darn fantastic. 360 miles in this trim or in the extreme trim, which is effectively the Ocean One currently available for sale. 350 miles if you choose the mid-level Ultra trim, and there are a few front-wheel drive models around. Those front-wheel drive models use a less powerful battery pack. It's a 75 kilowatt-hour LFP pack and a different motor, 275 horsepower up front, and that will give you 231 miles of total range. If you've watched this channel for any length of time, you probably know I don't like the EPA combined range number because it's kind of silly. I don't need to know how many times I can drive this in circles around Manhattan. I want to know, can I go from point A to point B? And thanks to the big battery pack, that number is still really healthy at 328 miles of highway range. Even if you were only to use 70% of that highway range as you would on a road trip, you could easily do a 500-mile road trip with just 2 stops in this vehicle, and you would need significantly more in a decent number of EVs. Hopping inside the cabin, we start to find elements of what I would call design hubris, the philosophy that if it works for me, it should work for everybody. And this is something I've certainly noticed in the comment section on our Facebook page when we've talked about this, or on some of the shorts that we've done with the Ocean. The seat bottom cushion does not adjust for tilt, and there's no adjustable lumbar support. If these seats are comfortable for you, great for you. But remember, not everybody is shaped the same. Some people need lumbar support a little bit higher, a little bit lower because they're taller or they're shorter. Some people might like a seat bottom cushion that has a bit more tilt for better thigh support. And I had noticed myself that if I want the seat bottom cushion to have a particular tilt that I find comfortable, I'm sitting quite high in this seat, and it makes it feel like I don't have any headroom left. But in reality, there is quite a lot of headroom if the seat's all the way down on the ground. Then, of course, we have a powered tilt telescopic steering column. It is, of course, controlled via the touchscreen LCD right there and these buttons on the steering wheel. I mentioned that cargo room was pretty similar to the Chevy Bolt earlier. The other thing that's pretty similar is legroom on paper. Now, in reality, this actually has more legroom than you'll find in the Bolt. We'll talk about that with child seats in just a second, but it's due to the way the seats are shaped and the way legroom is, of course, measured. We have lots of room for the feet down here, including a really big area where you can really stretch out your feet right here in the middle. The front seat tracks move pretty far rearward, so if you're a taller person up front, you shouldn't have a problem unless that seat bottom cushion isn't in the right position, of course, and you'd still be able to fit a 6-foot person comfortably behind them. Interestingly, as far as the shape of the rear seats go, I actually think that these seats are a little bit more comfortable than the front seats, but there's nothing bucket-like about this rear bench. It is just about as flat as Kansas all the way across. Rear passengers get a fold-down armrest. I'll show you that in a moment. And of course, we have that 40-20-40 folding seat back that I mentioned earlier. That's a really practical touch. Here's a better look at that really flat seat bottom cushion. Again, no bucket sort of styling going on here. We have 2 sets of latch anchors for the outboard seating positions, and they put them under these little zippers. They're actually easy to find once you get that little zipper open. I do think the zipper look is kind of peculiar. Between the seats and the door, we find the controls for the power recline mechanism for the rear seats, but somewhat unusually, these are not power fold, they're actually manual fold power recline. As you can see, legroom figures are a little bit deceiving sometimes because we have no problem fitting a rear-facing child seat like this behind a 6-foot tall driver like me, but I wouldn't be able to do this in a Chevy Bolt. So even though it does appear that the interior is somewhat similarly sized to that Chevy, this is in fact a larger interior. I'll just go ahead and move that out of the way. And I can also point out the fact that the one advantage to the really flat seat bottom cushion is that even though it's not quite as comfortable as some, it does mean that if you're sitting in the middle next to a child seat, A, you have a little bit more room, but B, you also have a more comfortable seating position. So if you are planning on using it as a family car, it could be a reasonable option. I said I would show you the armrest, and here's why. This is where we find a touch control panel for things like the heated outboard rear seats. We have some infotainment controls, climate control controls for the rear, and these fold-out cup holders right there. It does have a 3-zone climate control system and really unusual air vents back here in the rear. There's this little sort of matte chrome bar running right there across, but these are actually manual air vents in the back. You have to kind of fish around there for that. And then we have some USB-C charge ports. You can lock them up right there like that. And then again, that really large footwell area right there. So lots and lots of foot room in here. And then on the seat backs, we have a little jacket hook. As we look around the interior, keep in mind that this particular trim is an Ocean 1. You can get basically the same features in a new model. It just wouldn't be the limited edition Ocean 1 trim. Up here we have some touch controls for the various lights in the vehicle, things like the map lights, the dome light, etc. We also find controls for the rear window in the rear hatch. Then we find the California mode button right there in the middle. It does not work in this one quite right, again, because of the software malfunction. This is the control for the sunroof, which also does not work quite right because of the software calibration issue. Then over here we find the controversial sun visors. I don't find them to be too much of a problem, although I think they're a little bit silly. I think they could have just gone with a regular sun visor design. It does allow you to have a short sun visor or a tall sun visor, you know, you do you. We then have a really tiny little mirror. I should show you that because there's a really itty bitty little mirror inside. Seems like it's well done. Alcantara all over the ceiling, and from this angle you can see that solar roof. Here's what that looks like from the outside. You can see that these are the individual cells. You'll see the light going through those areas between the solar cells on the inside. I like the way that Fisker has done this. I know it's been a little bit controversial, but I think the design on the outside is kind of cool. This is the back pane of glass that does not move, and then this entire pane of glass slides all the way towards the rear of the vehicle. Those are basically the tracks for the sunroof there. So the whole thing does open really, really wide. Here's a view back on the inside. You can see the light shining through the area between those individual solar cells and that structural beam between the sides of the vehicle, between the two panes of glass. Again, the front pane opens and just gives you a little bit of an idea of how big that sheet of glass is. It is really, really big. Up front, we have fixed height headrests. They kind of look like they would adjust, but they in fact do not. The driver and front passenger get height adjustable shoulder belts, and here's a better look at this seat design. As you can see, the bolstering is not terribly aggressive. It's a little bit more aggressive on the seat back than on the seat bottom cushion. So if you like a really flat seat design, you might be okay with these, but I would really prefer a little bit more adjustability, and also a thigh cushion extension I think would be a nice touch. The seats are generally comfortable, but they're not as comfortable as a lot of seats that I could mention, especially in the luxury segment when we're talking about a $70,000 car. There are notably more comfortable seats out there. One of the big features with this interior is the amount of recycled material that's already in the interior and the CO2 footprint and just the general recyclability concerns that Fisker had when designing the interior. So this is one of the most recyclable and one of the most recycled interiors you can get in a new vehicle. This has the relatively expensive optional interior, which has the lighter colored Alcantara inserts, including this one with the little faux stitches over here on the dashboard, ambient light strip running right there under that. And then down here, no glove compartment. We find a little tray so that way you can eat or do whatever you want to do while you're charging. And that's for the passenger over there. Then there is a tray for the driver right here in the center console, but it does take up a lot of center console storage. So if I open that up, you'll notice not a lot of room there because this tray has to flip out right like that, and then it folds over kind of like an airplane tray, and then it folds over yet again right there to make it closer to the driver. Kind of a cool touch, but you know, I think I would have rather had a bit more storage in here. Now, in case you're wondering, there are what they would call glove compartments. There are these little slots under the seats. So if I go under here, it's a little bit difficult to show you. There's a little knob there. You can rotate the knob around like that, and then we get that little cubby in there. You can put papers or I don't know, whatever you want to put in there, and there's one under the driver's seat as well. But it's not as large or as accommodating as a glove compartment would be, and certainly not as convenient either. The other storage area is right here under the center console. It's a reasonable amount of storage. You can see that it has kind of a divider in it though. So there's one half over here, and then the other half of that storage area is on the passenger side. They connect, but there is that divider there. Then we have a little bit of storage under the screen. So there's actually another little storage compartment. You can put your stuff back there in that area. And then there are the twin Qi wireless charger mats there. This is what the key looks like in case you're wondering. That's that California mode button right up top, lock, unlock, hatch, etc. Two pretty decently sized cup holders, no complaints there with those. And then we have the somewhat controversial infotainment screen here. We'll zoom out a little bit so you can see that right there. What's interesting about this is that it rotates. So if I press this center button down here and hold, the software will, start thinking about it. And then the screen rotates. Although apparently, oh, there we go. Rotated and adjusted the software. Now, in this position, you can't drive the car. If I try and pull the drive stalk right there, it says gear shifter not in the right mode, and then it actually rotates that screen for me. Then I could hit drive and actually drive off. You can only use it when in park. If you try and do that when you're in drive, it just won't rotate the screen. It says error in rotation. So that is kind of a wacky thing. I actually think that I would prefer the screen in its horizontal implementation in this dashboard. This is one of the few vehicles, oh, little software glitch there. This is one of the only vehicles where you do have this choice of screen in one orientation or the other in the exact same interior. So you do get to see what would this dashboard look and feel like if it had a screen in this situation. And I think it's more convenient because when it's in its vertical orientation, some of the options are just really low and out of the driver's eye line. Now, looking back down here, you can see what's going on when the screen's in that position. We have that storage area right back there. And then we have this weird little LCD module here where we find the climate controls. We also have the fogger and defroster options there. That's actually a little touch screen there, by the way, so you can touch those options right like that. The button to rotate the screen around, and a volume toggle for the infotainment system. The buttons look attractive. The module, it's kind of flexy. It's not the most sturdy feeling thing. But overall, I think I like where they were going with the design. I think it just needed a little bit more time in the oven. And I would love to see the option of just having the screen in this orientation and just, I don't know, ditching that little module or something like that. Now, over here on this side, we find an actual LCD instrument cluster. It is on the small side of things, but I really love the fact that it's there. This one does have a few little software glitches because of that 12-volt battery. Keep that in mind. And then we have the two-spoke steering wheel. It's an attractive design, nice and thickly rimmed. I like the flat bottom design actually there. Over here, we find actual buttons right here. So track forward, backward, volume up, down, voice command button. The voice command does not work either thanks to that 12-volt battery issue. Over here we have the controls for the adaptive cruise control. It does work, but I can't adjust the distance because of the 12-volt battery issue. So definitely some quirks to keep in mind there. This is the drive mode selector, so you can choose between those various different drive modes right there on the screen. Now, in case you're wondering, this does have software version 2.0. I know a lot of folks will probably ask about that. The software is not the most responsive here and there, but this is Ocean OS 2.0 in case you're wondering. I'll go ahead and rotate the screen around so you can see it in this mode. Basically, in the horizontal mode, it allows streaming apps to be displayed on the screen. So say if you're DC fast charging. In the mode most people will interact with, we have the car display up here. It's going to give your ADAS system, so lane centering, things like that. That's all going to be up there. This is also where we find the cameras on the vehicle if you want to have the camera readout. There we go. It takes a little while for some of those things to respond. I do like the fact that the controls are above there and then the camera display is below. We also have the main home screen here where we have things like our mapping display, down here the seat heating, infotainment over there in that little widget. The native mapping interface is a little on the sluggish side, I have to admit. Over here we have the Bluetooth interface, Spotify, iHeartRadio, etc. And Fisker had promised Apple CarPlay and Android Auto. I honestly don't think they're ever going to come here because of the financial problems, but they had promised that they were working on it. Over here we have the charge screen. This is where you can see that the charge limit just goes up there to 32 amps, kind of a bummer. But even cooler, we have the Solar Sky readout there. This, again, really cool feature. If I go over here to the lifetime average, you'll see 104 miles have been added, 33 kilowatt hours by that solar roof. This car only has 2,500 miles on it. That's a pretty solid bump in terms of range. And if you are really wanting to know what your solar panel is doing at the moment, you can click over here to this screen. Right now I'm parked in the shade, so it's not doing a great deal for you. Over here we have our typical climate control controls, pretty obvious there. Less obvious though is the fact that the air vents are adjusted on the screen here. Bearing in mind that this vehicle is a 2-row rental and it has had kind of a hard life, I did notice that other people that had rented the car didn't realize this is where the adjustments were, and so half of the vents on this vehicle are actually broken and just pointing in a random direction. You can't actually adjust them on the screen because inside it is a pretty typical vane style arrangement where there's actually little vanes in there and there's a motor moving them around mechanically. Then of course we have the heated seats and heated steering wheel controls and things like that in there. The rest of the controls, they're over here on the driver's side. This is where you find the headlight controls, rear fog light controls, electric parking brake, and yes, there are still lots of stocks here, so they weren't trying to put everything on the screen. Windshield wiper adjustment, things like that, that's over there. And then over here we have the shifter stock for the vehicle. Park is the button at the end. Pretty typical console shifter right there. I do like the fact that they didn't abandon traditional controls, including over here for things like the window, or mirrors rather. You can actually power fold them there. We get the rear window controls over there, and then we have the door latch there. This is where you grab on the door to open it and close it. Some people have been complaining about that. This one actually feels pretty sturdy. Now you might be wondering what this little bauble on the A-pillar is. That's part of the driver assistance software and hardware on the Fisker Ocean, but unfortunately it has not been realized into any sort of hands-free driving assist system. That was the promise, but we're probably not going to see that. Now, sorry for the awkward angle here. This is that little storage cubby under the driver's seat. There's the lid right there. The interesting thing about this is that the inside of this is actually a fabric interior. You could fit a small tablet computer inside or something like a phone. That's how far that goes in there, and you can actually close that little door. I will let you decide what else you might want to hide under your seat. And since a lot of you were asking about the door panels and materials, here's a closer look at the door panels. We have a textured slush molded upper section, fabric insert right here in the middle, then a soft touch wrap right here on the door, also around that armrest, the Alcantara imitation suede right down there. Then we find more fabric on the inside of the door right here, including inside that bottle holder area. There's the button for the trunk, speaker grill right up there, and then hard plastics to improve durability below. I think the materials and the material selections were really well done in this interior. Some of the design elements are really more of a design preference, like this little funky bar that runs right there across the air vents. I mean, that's just a styling element. But I think that the rest of the interior, as far as materials, etc., was done really, really well. This interior is definitely in keeping with something like a Volvo maybe, or something like a Polestar as far as the interior materials and the interior material quality. They're just some of those weird quirks about lack of adjustability and some of the lack of features. You won't find a heads-up display, you won't find lumbar support or front seat massage or anything like that. We do have an ELS audio system, but we don't find one of those fancy German audio systems in here or anything like that. So how does the Ocean drive? Well, there's certainly room to make some nautical references, but I'll get to that in just a moment. 0 to 60, definitely very, very fast. If you're in the Earth mode, which is where the vehicle will default, I'll just come to a complete stop here, then acceleration is definitely brisk. Once the vehicle gets moving a little bit, there were definitely some wheel slips. So much power is coming from those twin electric motors, of course. But things get even more brutal if I put it in fun. That is where we're going to get 3.95 seconds 0 to 60 time after time. And interestingly, the same 0 to 60 time in the hyper mode. Now, hyper mode is where you can engage the boost mode. So if you're in hyper mode and you come to a complete stop and everything is right, all the stars align, you can then select it from the infotainment system over here. And that's where you're going to get 3.7 seconds 0 to 60. Again, I'm not going to be trying that mode in this video because I don't want to use up the boost modes that this vehicle has on it. I just don't think that's polite since someone owns this and they're just renting it out on Turo. But that is going to give you the quickest 0 to 60 time. Honestly, I don't think most folks are going to miss that boost mode, whether they run out of times or whether they just don't ever want to use it because they're worried about it, because in hyper mode, this is very, very, very fast. Fortunately, the first day we had this, it was dry outside, so I was able to actually try the hyper mode here. In the conditions that we're here now, the road is slick, it's wet right now, so any modest throttle application in straight lines only, mind you, like this, just results in instant wheel slip, even at 40 miles an hour. Just press your foot on there, you can definitely get some wheel slip. And that's just because we just have so much power, but also perhaps a little bit because this is pretty heavy. The curb weight on the Ocean is relatively high thanks to the big battery pack that we have. This model tips the scales at around 5,400 pounds, about the same curb weight as a 3-row SUV with a V8 engine under the hood, but I think that they did a good job disguising the curb weight for the most part. The suspension dynamics are a little unusual. Handling ability is actually pretty decent. You'll notice that on a winding mountain road you can certainly have an awful lot of fun with the Ocean. But when you start pushing things a little bit further, the suspension just feels a little bit wallowy. It kind of feels boat-like. There's definitely some floatiness going on, some unsettled motions in the suspension. You will notice that more on broken pavement than on a smoother road surface like this, but you'll also notice it if you start driving it more aggressively and you're really seesawing the steering wheel on your favorite winding mountain roads. There's a lot of body roll, there's a lot of tip and dive. If you step on the brakes, you definitely get some dive, lots of tip as well. Out on a rougher road like the gravel road that we're on here, you will certainly notice the unusual suspension tune in the Ocean. It feels soft for the most part. Most of these bumps are really well controlled, but the amount of motion we get in the suspension is somewhat limited for the curb weight that we have. And that results in running over some of these larger imperfections where it really feels like that just comes right into the cabin, and then it takes a while for the body to settle back down after it's impacted some of those larger bumps. I think an adaptive suspension system would really suit this car very well, perhaps an adaptive air suspension, but that would have made the vehicle even more expensive. Now, it does appear, according to some rumors, that Fisker was planning on having an adaptive suspension system in the vehicle, and that would have made sense, I think, but yet again, there's that cost part. Of course, a gravel road is not the only time you're going to notice the unusual suspension dynamics. Out here on this road surface, you'll certainly notice it in the expansion joints or the little potholes and bumps on the road, etc. Some come through into the cabin, and some it just glides right over. And sometimes it seems like there's relatively little rhyme or reason as far as what comes in and what doesn't come into the cabin. Gravel roads aren't the only surface where you're going to notice the unusual suspension tuning. Out on a paved road like this that seems relatively good, you'll also notice some peculiarities. If you run over some potholes, some small bumps in the road, etc., some of them it just glides right over, and some of them you'll feel really transmitted into the cabin. But you're always going to notice the suspension feels just a little bit peculiar. Also, the steering is a lot lighter than I had thought it would be. I was assuming this would have a much firmer steering rack, but there's actually quite a lot of boost and not a lot of feel coming back from the front tires. Now, feel, that's something that we gave up a long time ago in the era of electric steering, but I had expected just the steering rack to be a little bit firmer, the boost to be a little bit lower. In my cabin noise testing at 50 miles an hour, I measured 70 decibels in here, making this just about average for a modern EV. You'll certainly find some luxury segment EVs that are a bit quieter and some mainstream EVs that are a little bit louder out on the road. Fuel efficiency has been particularly impressive. Keep in mind, 5,400 pounds, it's an SUV with relatively wide tires and almost 500 horsepower without the boost mode. So all of that should yield relatively higher consumption, relatively lower efficiency. But in fact, I've been averaging 3.5 miles per kilowatt hour so far, which would put this battery actually over its EPA estimate of 360 miles of combined range. The weather has been relatively mild. It's been rainy, but relatively mild over the last few days. And tomorrow I'm going on a 250-mile road trip, so I will post those averages up top, not the 3.5 miles I've been getting so far. I think that on a road trip, you're actually going to do pretty well in this. I've noticed that at a steady 70 miles an hour, if I could spit that out of my mouth, that I was averaging about 3.2 miles per kilowatt hour. So again, right there in line with those EPA estimates. As long as you're not using the heat on high, things like that, this should be just fine. Hills are obviously going to be a bit more of a problem because going up and over those hills, this has a lot more curb weight than some of those lighter EVs, but the regenerative ability seems to be pretty decent. Now, on the downside, I really don't like the way that regenerative braking is done in this vehicle. By all appearances, it does have a blended braking system, so if I put this on the low regenerative braking mode, that's the throttle liftoff regen, we get a little bit, not too much, but then I can feather it in with my foot on the brake pedal. If I'm braking gently here and then I transition to a more aggressive braking, you will notice that there is kind of a pause in the braking, kind of like driving a first generation Toyota Prius. It does take some getting used to. There have been some software recalls on this because people really didn't like the way the braking feels, and I kind of agree with them on that. but I would probably go with the low regenerative braking mode, because if I'm in high, here's what happens. Going down the road here just fine, take my foot off the pedal, I get what I think is an okay amount of regen, and then there's this weird pause, and then all of a sudden it starts more regen, and the transition is just not elegant, it's not smooth. And it does become a little bit upset over looser surfaces. So if it's on high and you're on a gravel road surface, or earlier today where there were a lot of leaves on the road and it was still actively raining, the stability and traction control system seems to become a little bit confused. And if you're feathering the brake pedal in, like I am right now, or sorry, the accelerator pedal with this one pedal drive mode, and you lift off just a little too aggressively, then there isn't the weird delay that you get in the just throttle liftoff part. It's really aggressive in just jamming the regenerative braking on. It's a really peculiar setup that I think would just be fixed by keeping it in the low mode all the time. As far as the on-road driving dynamics go, some of the things that I've complained about here could be fixed in software. I have no doubt that they could make the regenerative braking and blended braking system work more smoothly in the software. They could probably also tweak the boost mode and maybe give us something after that 500 miles. We just don't know what that future could have held for them. Some of the things, however, just cannot be fixed in software. Because this does not have an adaptive suspension system, you can't fix the suspension tuning in software. That would require a hardware change. And that's something that I would really have liked to have seen in the Ocean. I think more of a, I can't believe I'm saying this, but more of a sporty suspension tune would have been a bit more appropriate to the weight of this vehicle. There's a reason that a lot of big battery EVs have that firm and bouncy feel, because you got to be able to control the suspension and control the vehicle's motions in a relatively limited window of suspension travel. This has the same limited suspension travel, but it has a softer tune, which means that sometimes you're just hitting those suspension endpoints basically, and it kind of creates a weird feel out on the road. The steering, maybe that could be fixed in software. They could reduce the amount of boost we get in the electric steering system as well. Cabin noise, I think that's pretty decent. Fuel efficiency, honestly, nothing to improve there because it's pretty darn decent. And also acceleration, nothing to improve there because the acceleration times are definitely fantastic. Not exactly related to the way the vehicle drives, there are other things that I like. I like the fact that we have physical controls, an actual switch for the windshield wipers, the turn signals, the gear shifter here. We aren't sliding on a screen, something like that. I have an instrument cluster exactly where it belongs. I have a switch for the headlights. You know, there are touch controls over here for the defogger, but it's a separate control panel. It's pretty easy to identify, pretty easy to locate. Also, physical toggles for the climate control temperature in the vehicle. Now, if you want to adjust some of these things in software, you can actually adjust some of them, but not all of them, which is kind of a weird thing. So you can't, for instance, use the central control panel for your defogger or your defroster. It's just that tiny little panel down there. But I do like the fact that we have these extra controls inside the vehicle. I also don't mind the sunroof. I know a lot of folks were complaining about that in the forums, the fact that sometimes the light is shining through those little sections between the solar panels. I actually think the solar panel is one of the coolest features on the Ocean, and that's something that I wish every EV out there would get. Instead of the usual pricing and comparison section, let's talk about what's gone right and what's gone wrong at Fisker and with the Ocean. I think the design is beautiful. I think they knocked it out of the park. Again, it looks very Jaguar-like, which I appreciate, very modern, very clean. I also do appreciate some of the engineering solutions, even the ones that aren't quite fully baked. Features especially like the opening moonroof that has solar panels integrated into it. I know some people aren't a fan of the lack of shade on the inside, but you could easily fix that with tinting. And it is a functional piece of machinery. It's generated this vehicle 100 miles of electric driving over only 2,500 miles and 5 months of existence on this earth. That's a really cool feature. I also kind of like the rear windows that slide down. They're kind of a cool touch that you can show to your friends. But you can tell that features like that are where things started to go a little off the rails. I don't know exactly what went on inside the engineering department at Fisker, but I'm going to assume, based on my experience in Silicon Valley and working in other fields, that there was maybe not quite as much engineering direction as maybe they could have used. Someone probably could have sat down and said, that's a really cool touch, we'll do that in the refresh. They could have said, you know what, those lights, those are a really cool touch, we'll do that in the refresh. The rotating screen, maybe we're not going to make it rotate in this version. Maybe we don't need so many colors, twice the number of colors that you'll find on a Tesla. Maybe we should narrow it down to 3 or 4 colors, see how that goes. Maybe we don't need so many wheels, maybe just 1 or 2. Those sorts of things could have helped this achieve a better price tag. And for me, that's really where things sit. It's the price tag problem. Anything can be forgiven for the right price. Could this be forgiven for $70,000? No, I don't think so. Could it be forgiven for $61,000, which is where the extreme trim will start, ostensibly if you could order one now? No, I think that's still too high. For $61,000, you will find more efficient EVs out there with features that you won't find on this, like heads-up displays, more traditional layouts, more reliable software, etc. If you're going to be giving a startup company some cash for a product that still needs a little bit more time in the oven, I think it should be less expensive. I think that for this vehicle as equipped here, if it had come out at around $45,000, this would have been fantastic. The problem there is obvious though. You could not have made this car and sold it for $45,000 because Fisker would have been bankrupt last year rather than this year. Making a car is expensive, and that's probably the biggest problem that they had, was they just didn't have the resources to really make fetch happen. This particular model, I think also they should have just not made the front-wheel drive version yet, or they should have just started with the front-wheel drive version, just one or the other. There was a lot going on at Fisker. Then there's the Pear, there's the Alaska, etc., etc., etc. Too many vehicles going on for too limited resources, and I think that's where things have gone wrong. What's the future? I don't really know. I really do like the Ocean as far as its concept goes. The application, that's again where there's a problem. The driving and handling dynamics, they're a little bit peculiar, not exactly my cup of tea. You'd probably get used to it. It's not the biggest problem. Handling ability, again, it's okay, not the biggest asset for this. The lack of luxury features on the inside, that's a bigger problem. The lack of adjustable lumbar support, the lack of seat bottom cushion tilt. I know some folks are really big fans of the seats. That's great if they fit you, but remember, not everybody is the same size and shape, and these seats are definitely not comfortable for me. They could have spent the money instead of the power reclining second row seat on just giving us a feature like that. They could have deleted the turning screen in the dashboard, the second little LCD below it, and they could have given us some of those other features. Let me know what you think about that down there in the comments section below. Bottom line, the Ocean is not the worst car I've ever driven. It's actually not even close. I would say it's solid mediocre at best. But it had such promise. This could have been fantastic with just a little bit more time, just a little bit more money. Personally, I hope Fisker gets another chance. I do hope that someone saves them, because if they had spent, again, a little bit more time and a little bit more money, this could be a really great vehicle. The price tag is a problem, its assembly location's a problem. If it was built in North America with North American batteries, it would qualify for a tax credit, which you will get on a Tesla Model Y, of course, and you will not get on this. We may or may not get one on the Rivian R2, but the R2 is at least 2 years away, and at the moment, this, again, kind of stands alone in that way. Let me know what you think about all that down there in the comment section below. Do you own an Ocean? Were you interested in owning an Ocean? Did you put a pre-order down or something like that? Are you one of those people that's trying to get your cash back? Let me know all that down there in the comment section below. And do you think that Fisker deserves maybe a third chance? Do we need Fisker 3.0? Hopefully by then, they could really get some of these engineering feature creep issues under control. Let me know what you think about that down there in the comment section below, and I'll see all of you later.